internet dropped at some point. I'm in a hotel in Bluff, Utah. Um,
Greetings, everyone. Hello. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Well, welcome to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, as well as the Campaign for Equal Dignity. We hope you are doing well and that you are taking care of yourself and your family and that you are doing the best in this difficult time for everybody. Um, One thing I wanted to say at the top of the program is that I just want to encourage everyone now that we're past registration, that if you are registered to vote, that you make sure that you get out and do that in November. It's a very important part of our country, and I just encourage everyone to vote. If you are in Georgia, today is the first day of early voting. So if you'd like more information about early voting, as far as precincts and that kind of thing are concerned, the easiest way to explain it is just to go to georgia.gov. On their landing page, they have a bunch of information that explains to you how to get the information on where you need to go to vote early if you think that's important. If you have medical issues or anything like that, it is a really good way to get out ahead of the crowds for voting. So today, our program centers around Indigenous Peoples Day. Indigenous Peoples Day, just to give you a tiny little backstory, kind of begins in 1989 with another holiday that was called Native American Day, which was started in South Dakota. And then a few years later in 1992 in California, Indigenous Peoples Day was launched. Actually, both are still celebrated in a variety of areas around the country. More Indigenous Peoples Day these days. And so the exhibit that we'll be discussing in this program sort of launched out of that same initiative. It's called Spirit. It was created by Lenscratch, which is an online photography presentation. We are hosting the exhibit on our Equal Dignity page. So if you go to equaldignity.org/spirit-exhibition, you can check it out. It's also available through our website. So to begin the conversation today, I would like to start out by just speaking with the founder of Lenscratch, Aline Smithson, and the curator of this exhibit, Donna Garcia.
Good morning. Thank you, David.
Hello. Welcome, Donna. Welcome, Aline. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to give a little bit of background how this all came about.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Some months ago, I heard Donna give an artist lecture through the Los Angeles Center of Photography, and I was profoundly moved by her talk. And it made me realize I wanted to know more about Indigenous artists and issues.
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to Donna. I didn't know her. I'd never met her, and proposed the idea of creating a week around this idea. And I got back a definitive yes response. I really can't thank her enough for her tremendous efforts in making this all happen, in creating these amazing connections with the National Center of Civil and Human Rights and Atlanta Celebrates Photography. And this is really a shining example of what we can do in partnership with other organizations and institutions. In terms of Lenscratch, it is important for us as an institution to elevate and support Indigenous photographers and issues, and to shine a light on these powerful projects and recognize the Indigenous voice in the photographic conversation. So thank you to all the artists for participating. And again, thank you to Donna for your masterful curation.
Yes. And actually, thank you, Aline. I forgot to mention that today's program is also in partnership with Atlanta Celebrates Photography. Thank you to Bex and the team there for helping us to promote it. Donna, so Aline had this idea for an exhibition. I would just be curious to know, like, where did your mind go? Like, what were the ideas that you were interested to to see come to fruition there?
So when Aline sent me the email, I started thinking about what I would want for work and from the artists in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I definitely knew is that I wanted a broad scope of work. I didn't want just established artists that were kind of doing one thing in one area. I wanted to have a lot of different visual perspectives. And what we got from that is icons in photography like Will Wilson and Shelley Nero, who we have on the panel today, to artists that are just emerging, like Kaylee Spitzer and Bubsy and Jeremy Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
What really struck me is when I saw Will and Shelley's amazing work that really spans decades, is that in my exploration of contemporary lens-based art, I hadn't seen their work before. And that was really amazing to me that I had not encountered it. So I really felt like even though the artists are doing work around Indigenous issues, they're also doing work around human issues.
Absolutely.
So we, have to know, I wanted to create a show where visually you could know what the icons know, you could see what the visionaries could see, you could discover what the searchers have found, and see how these innovators are creating.
Mm-hmm.
And through these different visual perspectives, as a collective, these artists have the potential to reshape, rewrite, and retell history in North America. And now is certainly the time.
Absolutely.
So,
Aline, it almost sounds like she's kind of like reading your, like sort of the mission statement of Lenscratch, having like spent a decent amount of time on the Instagram and on the website. It feels like that was a lot of what you've been after with this whole project.
Right, exactly. I mean, I'm just so thrilled at Donna's broad perspective, and she's right. I mean, we need to put Indigenous voices at the forefront, and they haven't been. So this is such an exciting initiative.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, particularly for Aline, because she's on West Coast time, so it's quite a bit earlier there than it is here. So thank you for taking the time with us. Donna, we'll see you in a few minutes. We'll speak to you again. But Aline, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'd like to bring in Shelley Nero and Pat Kane, who are two of the photographers in the exhibition, to get into more about what their work is about. So I'll just kind of go through this here. Shelley Nero is a member of the Six Nations Reserve Bay of Quintet Mohawk Turtle Clan. You're going to correct me on that. I really appreciate it. Shelley Nero is a multimedia artist. Her work involves photography, painting, beadwork, and film. Shelley graduated from the Ontario College of Art honors and received her Master's of Fine Art from the University of Western Ontario. In 2017, Nero received the Governor's General Award for the Arts from the Canada Council. Nero was honored with an honorary doctorate from the Ontario College of Art and Design University in 2019. In March 2020, Nero received the Paul Duhek Norman Walford Career Achievement Award from the Ontario Arts Foundation. Shelley, so if you could begin first by just correcting me, can you pronounce that name correctly?
Bay of Quinte Mohawk, is that what you're asking about?
Yes, Bay of Quinte Mohawk. Thank you so much. And welcome. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome Pat Kane. Pat is a photographer in Yellowknife, Northwestern Territories. He covers people, life, environment in Northern Canada. Pat identifies as mixed Indigenous and settler and is a proud Algonquin Anishinaabe member of the Tishomingo First Nation of Quebec. Pat values the importance of mentorship from people in northern communities. He is the co-founder and president of the Far North Photo Festival, a platform to help elevate the work of photographers in underrepresented parts of Northern Canada. Pat is also part of the photo collective Natives Photography and Boreal Collective. And in 2020, World Press Photo Juche Swart Master Participant. Pat, welcome to our program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. And I feel quite honored to be in the company of Shelley and Will and all of you. This is great.
Well, we are so thankful to have both of you, I mean, really all four of you on with us today. I wanted to begin with just excuse me one sec, sorry. With something that Shelley mentioned that really struck me that as something that I didn't understand and I wanted to know better. She says, Indigenous sovereignty where women are central. That was a topic that she really wanted to discuss. What does that look like to you? What sort of obstacles exist? Not being somebody who knows a lot about Indigenous communities, I don't really know much about that. So I would really like for you to explain a bit more. Oh, your mic is muted, Shelley.
Sorry about that. If we go back in history before the colonists arrived, women were the ones who controlled the economy, told warriors when they could go and fight. They had a really, they're the ones who were in charge. And after the colonizers arrived and saw that the women were in charge, they had to figure out how to put a stop to it because they needed the men to go into war. And so as time went on, you're going to see in history books that they figured out how to do it, by promoting the men into giving them ranks in their armies, probably giving them money as well. And so the women lost all the power, and they lost the power in who was going to protect the community and how. The women also had, they controlled the agriculture. They planted the gardens, they processed the food, they traded everything. So it was like they were pretty powerful. And at the end of the American Revolution, they lost a lot of that power. So in my work, I try to not bring back that power, but just to make women an important element in the work that I'm doing by showing that they are, they're still creative, they're still participating, and we are fully aware of how we are placed in history. So.
And is there an element of that sort of female history that you feel like is integral to that goal of sovereignty, or is it just a way that you want to see that appear? Is it a return to that you think will actually allow that to be a case?
I think
that move that ball forward?
It's a definite wanting to be part of the overall picture of how things are done. Mm-hmm. Because, so it's like women can sometimes do get that power, and then sometimes it's not given to them, sometimes it's taken away. So it's, sort of a really questionable place to be in. And it's, I think it's something like we're all working to it. And I think there's a lot of powerful women who are participating. Mm-hmm. But until everybody recognizes the importance of having Indigenous women at the table discussing what should be, how things should be run, I think it's something that we have to fight for, and we're still fighting for it.
And are there particular activists or particular movements right now in that process that you are the most interested in, that you'd like to bring some attention to?
Well, I think it's every day. You see it in the papers every day, and every time you look at something, and especially where Indigenous people or communities are involved. It's something that people have to understand and see and really relate to that whole condition. There's a horrible story. There's a horrible story coming out of Quebec that happened last week, the week before, about a woman going into an emergency, and she recorded her final moments in that hospital and how these people really mistreated her. And they called her, the things they said to her were just so horrible. You wouldn't believe it. So it's like it's a case of people not seeing how everybody else sees them. But I think it's you know, my job, the artist's job, to remind people that, you know, we're people and we can't really be treated that way.
Pat, you mentioned something in an email that I'd kind of like to connect there. You mentioned that your work mostly takes place in remote communities and around developing trust. I wonder if there isn't more allyship in other communities that could be valuable if we knew more, if we were more connected. Is that something that you're trying to get through in your work, trying to connect people to the struggle?
Yeah, I think I get a lot of questions from people that say, how do you get into communities and build trust? And I try to tell people that it's actually not as hard as you think. I find the people, especially in my communities and the places I go, are always probably the most welcoming people that I've been around. So it's actually not hard to meet people and to connect with people. Just to be like a nice, normal person goes a long way. Shake people's hands, look people in the eyes, say hello, listen is a big one. So I think there's not any photographic trickery or tips or techniques. It really comes down to who you are as a person and how willing you are to engage with people and to sit back and let them teach you. I find that I really look forward to getting out into smaller remote communities because I learn something new all the time. And I love that aspect of it. And I love just being around people who have something insightful to offer. And to help celebrate that as well. And just to get back to a little bit of what Shelley was chatting about.
Yeah.
Is I'm currently working on a project through World Press Photo. It's a masterclass or a fellowship program. And it's about the idea of indigenizing or decolonizing. And it has a lot to do with the women. Now that I'm kind of near the end of this program, a lot of the photography and interviews I've done have been with women, and they're really leading the charge in the idea of getting past colonial constructs and moving towards self-determination and reclaiming this sense of identity that has always been a struggle. And it's not nothing new, but there is kind of a new movement, especially here where I live in Northern Canada, of women going back to relearning traditional skills like moose hide tanning, for example, or beading. And, you know, reclaiming names and honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And it very much is it's not a matriarchal thing, but it's the women are definitely moving this forward. And I find that really admirable. And connecting with them has been really amazing for me personally. But also I hope to share their stories in a way that people will understand the important work that they're doing.
There was another suggestion that Shelley, you made regarding violence against women and land. And I was really curious to know a lot more about that, because I think a lot of times violence against women is really seen as solely an issue between people, but it seems that you're trying to connect it to the experience of the lands in which people live and possibly the history of them. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, it's about resources that come from the land and who is going to be able to take the resources and how they're going to be taking them.
Oh, I think you might have frozen.
For quite a few years. I'm certainly not an expert in that subject, but I think I'm becoming aware of how people are, or how corporations and governments are getting into those areas, and women become they're sort of like the sacrifice of that. And it's such a huge issue that I feel like I can't even begin to explain it well enough. But I think one of the reasons to create work is to keep the visualization of Native women out there and present. Because once you stop being present, then anybody can do anything to you,
Certainly.
So I think it's a really important thing to
Well,
begin.
and I'd like to talk more about the work. Your piece is really striking, and I feel like there's a lot of thought that went into it, and I would be curious to know a bit, about how you created it, what your inspiration was, but also kind of what some of the responses have been already to it.
Is this the shirt you're talking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The shirt piece came about when I was going to a photography conference in Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I, sitting by the window, looking out the window, and everything in the landscape was like patchwork. It was all chopped into a square, and it would look like, everything had a fence around it. And it really made me think about the Indian people who lived there and really fought to hold on to their land, and the settlers coming through and how they pushed through, and it was really a huge struggle, and how it was mostly Comanches who were pushed someplace else. So I just thought, the people that had to live there and then leave their area, and what they really had to give up just to live. And so when I got to the conference, as I'm sitting there looking at the words that are on the shirt came to me. And, it seemed like it just seemed like such a simple project. I thought, wow, this is really great, because they just came to me. So I asked my friends, Hilaria Teston, Jenny, and Veronica Pasalaco, if they would participate in the making of that piece for me. And they said, yes, they would. And, that piece in video form has gone all over the place. So it speaks to a lot of people. When I finished making the work, it was in 2003. It's just when U.S. was starting to send weapons and soldiers over to, I think it was Iraq. And I just thought, well, those poor Iraqis are going to be sitting there watching their sheep, and they don't know what's going to come and get them, So that was another reason that I wanted to get the piece done and get it out there too.
It's amazing how it feels like it could have been made, yesterday or 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Just for everybody who hasn't seen the exhibition already, it's a collection of self-portraits, and she's wearing different t-shirts that have different messages on them. I also, just being slightly mindful of time, wanted to talk to Pat a bit about his piece, which is a little bit more documentary style. And I thought there must be some interesting anecdotes, kind of connected to what you were saying before about getting involved in communities and meeting people, about how the photos were created. So if there was a story that that sticks out for you about the experience of making that work.
Yeah, my body of work that I'm showing is called Guardians of the North, and it's about conservation in Northern Canada and the Northwest Territories specifically. And we wanted to tell a story that was less about the landscape and animals, which is what you see a lot of in conservation photography. Mm-hmm. And I thought, why don't we show the people that are using the land, because the land and the people are inseparable. Mm-hmm. And getting back to the land is like it's conserving culture and identity as well. It's not only about the animals and the landscapes, but the people and their beliefs and their hunting grounds and harvesting areas and grave sites and traveling routes and all sorts of things. A funny little anecdote is I was this is one of the first shoots that I did. I was on a moose hunt. It was like harvesting time and up here, and we're on a moose hunt with a family. There's like 13 of us, and then, you know, I was just an outsider. I'd never met them before. Totally welcomed me with open arms and amazing. And I slept in a little tent that I brought with me outside.
Cool.
There's a cabin where you know, the mom and the father and a couple of the kids slept in. And one night I heard something outside of my tent, and I was like, oh no, because there's moose meat hanging all over the place and there's bears around.
Right.
I thought for sure this is going to be the end of me. And I only had on a parka and my underwear, and I ran out of my tent when the coast was clear, and I went into the cabin, and they woke up and were like, what's going on? I'm like, I think there's a bear outside my tent. They're like, oh, well, we'll take a look. You can sleep here. So I slept in the room with them. The next morning we looked outside and there was snow that had fallen, and it was just little rabbit tracks around my tent. So not a bear. So they had a good laugh at me for coming in because of a bunny. But
I'm sure that really ingratiated you to the
oh, for sure. Absolutely. And that was just like something they teased me for the rest of the time, and we laughed, and it was amazing. So, like, you know, it's those little things. There's no big secret to working with different communities or people. It's just, you know, have fun, be normal, be gracious, listen, learn, and do a good job.
Yeah. Have you found that the approach that you've taken, being a little bit, I guess, more sort of humanistic than natural about the environmental work has taken up with people? Like, is that something that they're getting the idea, or is it?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think people recognize, especially, you know, when you move outside the communities and talk with NGOs, like I get approached by a lot of NGOs and environmental groups, because they see that the work is actually quite unique, even though it's second nature to us living here, and where there is this deep connection between people and the land. When people from outside of our communities see this, people working and boating and going on snowmobiles and trapping and all sorts of activities, they're kind of like, oh, I never really put the two together, because I guess in the South, people think that the land and people are totally separate, and that you leave a community to go do something like camping or hiking.
Right.
Whereas here, it's very much like your identity. Like, we're sort of like the trees and the water and the land are a part of us.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people. I have very much have that experience, and that is really kind of enlightening to step back and think about that there are a lot of ways in which people interact with their environments, and how those things really are instructive about whom they are and how they should be related to.
Yeah, it's a very deeply spiritual connectedness that I think once people get into that mind frame where we are connected to the land and the water and the air, you really think about life and the people around you differently, in a more compassionate way. I think we're missing a lot of that, especially now in today's world,
Right.
where it's like, it's actually a really beautiful form of mental health and spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that that I was kind of inspired by looking at all of the work in the exhibition was just to kind of I was curious to see, like, as individuals, when you thought about taking the opportunity and accepting the exhibition, what you initially thought about submission. Was there something that jumped off the page and said, I'm definitely going to send this? Did it take you a minute to kind of work through like what had been talked about and find something that felt topical or poignant? Like, what is that process like? Because it's not something I'm familiar with.
I'll just start. I think for me, so I was approached by Donna, and yeah, right away you're always like wanting to know where your work is going to be shown and if it falls into the right hands. So there's always that that bit of investigation that I think each of us does, because there are organizations out there that just want to promote BIPOC or Indigenous or Black photographers' work just because it's good, you know, PR, or it's good for their brand or what have you. So I really look into those kinds of things, and you know, when it's honest and it's true support and wanting to share and celebrate, I'm all in. And so that was kind of how I was approached by from Donna and the group. And yeah, it's just it's a good opportunity to also share the stories from here in remote parts of the world, and to see what other people are doing too.
Yeah. So how does that relate to your process when you're looking at opportunities and how to accept them or deny them?
Well, when Donna got in touch with me, I was really excited about having my work included in an exhibition, you know, of this caliber and this thoughtfulness. And I think it really, because sometimes as an artist, like, you know, your mind is going all over the place. So this way I could really focus on what I wanted to send and think about the intention of the work too. So it was really a great opportunity for me.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. I certainly really appreciate you saying yes to that email and being included in the exhibit. It will be up for quite a while, so folks will be able to take the time to check out all the images and read through the artist statements. But thank you so much, Pat and Shelley. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to now introduce Will and Donna. Will Wilson studied photography, sculpture, art, and art history at University of New and Oberlin College. In 2007, Will won the Native American Fine Art Fellowship from the Etijor Museum. In 2010, the Joan Mitchell Foundation Award for Sculpture. In 2016, the Pollock Krasner Foundation Grant for Photography. Wilson has held visiting professorship at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Oberlin College, and University of Arizona. His work is exhibited and collected nationally and internationally. Wilson is program head of photography at Santa Fe Community College. Will, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Opportunity.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And Donna Garcia, who is also our curator. Oops, we're backtracking here a little bit. Donna is an MFA in photography from Savannah College of Art and Design, and her work has been exhibited internationally. In 2019, she was nominated for the Regeneration 4 Challenge of Photography and the Museum of Tomorrow. Musée de l'Is, Lausanne, Switzerland, Emerging Artist to Watch, Fine Art Photography nomination. So that is fantastic. Donna, welcome back to the conversation, as we were just speaking with you before.
Thanks. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, it was a really great email for me to get. Donna and I had worked previously when I collaborated with some folks at Savannah College of Art and Design Atlanta on an exhibition I still miss that piece. Her piece was positioned right by the front door of our museum. And it was always interesting to see when we were coming in from the parking garage. Also, it was kind of interesting to see as the first thing people saw as they came in. People would always ask me lots of things about it. So I'd like to jump in with a suggestion from Will. He says, how can art/artists be brought to the table to help imagine solutions to complex problems? I think this is an awesome suggestion. And I find it super interesting because in a lot of contexts, in education, government, business, art is really kind of like a last part of the equation. Like you have a product and then you market it. There are certain lots of arts grants that are part of our governments, but artists are not a part of the functioning of government. So I thought this was a really interesting suggestion about how ideas could be moved forward by that. And it also kind of connects to what Shelley was saying in our first conversation about furthering the importance of women in Indigenous communities. So Will, if you could tell me a little bit about what you were thinking when you made that suggestion.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say first, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, Donna, for kind of curating this and being the person who's networking this. A good example of a woman doing some really important work, I think. So thank you. And also Eileen and Lenscratch. Yeah, I just think that artists, I don't know, I think maybe it's kind of a selfish positioning to put that statement out there because, as someone who's kind of in the field trying to figure out
Right.
how to spotlight, I guess, problems and then imagine possible solutions. That's kind of one of the things that I see my role as an artist and as an educator, I guess. And certainly photography has the power to kind of, illuminate some of these important issues. I'm coming to you from a hotel in Bluff, Utah right now because it was, some internet that I could count on, right? I'm in the middle of doing this project right now where I'm photographing, I don't know, some people talk about it in terms of nuclear colonialism. There are 521 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. And so I'm doing this survey right now, and it's tentatively entitled Connecting the Dots, where I've gone out and started photographing these. And I'm just doing kind of initially like a survey of land. And it was interesting to hear Pat talk about conservation photography, and it's kind of, historically it's been the land without people, but Indigenous folk have always been in those sites. We've always inhabited and lived in those spaces, and I think that same kind of idea was present when the in the mid 19th century, the survey photography of the American West.
Sure.
You see these, amazing kind of landscapes and vistas, but they're absent of people. It's kind of this uninhabited land ripe for exploitation, essentially. So I don't know, that's something in my mind as I'm doing this, but then I'm also thinking maybe about, the people who have occupied these spaces and who did the work, who mined the uranium, who were not warned about the danger of, radiation and radon. And now we have this problem that's with us for, I don't know, what's the half-life of uranium? It's going to be here for a long time, and it's the effects are being felt today and will be for generations to come. So,
and that's interesting because when this is actually mentioning this work you're doing right now is probably the perfect example of your point, because when you say uranium mine, people are not at all what I'm thinking about immediately, right? Like my first thought is like, imagining this like scientific facility and it's very dangerous and whatever, but you know, the people who are working in there, the people who, you know, are trucking to and from it, the people who are directly connected to it are not really my first thought. I kind of think of the nature. I think of like, you know, how long it'll be, you know, in effect. But your work is going to make this, connect these dots, as you're saying, to the people around this, these sites, and how they are seeing this generational effect, and it's not the first thought. So I mean, all of a sudden now you could be thinking from seeing this piece about, you know, laws that should be written, or you know, money that needs to be, you know, allocated for cleanup or for healthcare, that kind of thing. Maybe that's sort of what you were suggesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think part of the idea, you know, initially documenting, being on the land, talking to people, learning more about the history of this, you know, the legacy, is to try and figure out how to move forward, right? What are some of the solutions? How do you kind of reframe remediation for this specific situation?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think right now I'm just in this state where I'm trying to learn, and I'm also trying to, you know, bring light to the situation. I mean, there are a lot of people who are actually, you know, actively, you know, grassroots activists working on making sure that, you know, this legacy is acknowledged and remediation does happen. You know, for instance, there's this Tronox versus US government settlement that happened, and there's about $1 billion earmarked for remediation on the Navajo Nation.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my fears, my worries, and is that, you know, there isn't a whole lot of capacity for cleaning up nuclear waste on the Navajo Nation. And I'm really worried that potentially the people who know best how to clean up the mess are the people who created the pollution in the first place.
Right.
You know, and I don't want that $1 billion to go back to the polluters on the backside, you know.
Right.
Is there a way that we can kind of refocus remediation so that, you know, young Navajo, like men and women, are trained in, you know, hydrology and like remediation, civil engineering, in order to take care of this problem that's
Mm-hmm.
been kind of dropped on the nation.
Yeah, but
So
that is a creative solution.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me is really the missing component. You know, for a lot of people, it would make sense. Problem is created, assess, you know, damage, assess, you know, like what needs to be done, and do the most efficient process to like solve problem. But you're really sticking right in the middle of that and saying, hey, it's not about what the easiest thing or the most efficient thing is. It's about how holistic it is, like what it does for the community.
Hmm. I think there's some level of like reckoning that has to happen, like truth and reconciliation, you know, in relation to this, because there's this whole history that I don't think, you know, very many people are aware of. And yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be, you know, part of it for sure. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about the Black Lives Matter mantra, "I can't breathe," kind of in relation to this, is, you know, a kind of intersectional, I think, place where, you know, different communities, BIPOC communities who are affected by environmental injustice, you know, because there's kind of the slow form "I can't breathe" going on out here in relation to this, and you know, lung cancer that's a result of radon
Right.
exposure that happened mining like 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That
It
you
is
know,
it does have a history. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And again, like making those connections between modernity and history, you know, people and government, like I think it does require a certain type of framing, you know, for lack of a, not to make a photography pun, but well, I'd like to also what, you know, I'm kind of right next to this next thought, which is talking about something Donna suggested, which is about historical inaccuracies and rewriting history. So there's obviously been a lot of rewriting done, and that goes into a lot of what you're talking about with these histories of, you know, the nuclear sites on a reservation. At some point that was probably not a known thing, you know, like it was hidden and rewritten in some context. So Donna, could you tell me a little bit more about what you were thinking when you made those suggestions?
So when I did my series Indian Land for Sale, it's about the Indian Removal Act of 1830 here in the South predominantly, but in other places too. But I was doing it because I was in your show about Atlanta and the legacy of Atlanta. So what kind of was amazing to me was when I was doing my primary research on the Indian Removal Act, the Trail of Tears, like people knew what it was, but I would go to, and I won't name these places per se, but places that held archives of historical information back to the sort of beginning of people living here. And the Native history and culture was pretty much wiped from the archives. Like none of these places had any archives that showed that Native people lived here. And I went outside of Atlanta and I just kind of got a lot of apologies as to why there was no information. So it really made me realize that genocide was successful in wiping out not only the people, but the culture here. So my body of work and my series.
Be specific. You do mean like as far as how the sort of macro is informed about the culture? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So when I did my series, I really wanted to do it as a retelling of history as it actually happened from the perspective of the Native people here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is the time to rewrite history because we know who originally rewrote the history book.
So rewriting of the rewrite, yes.
And, even in looking at Will's project, and Will sent me 2 projects. It was nearly impossible for me to decide, but I did. And the project that I chose was the autoimmune response. There's information in researching that project of his I had no idea about regarding a uranium explosion that happened that released more radiation than 3 Mile Island. Never heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So it's sort of time for history to be told, corrected, let's say.
Right. And actually, Will, when you were sort of explaining this a moment ago, you didn't actually really say that much about the historical aspect, but like, how is that a factor of it? Like, were you doing a lot of research on the locations and the people that were in them? Was that easy to do, or was it kind of difficult? Like, how did that go?
Well, I mean, I think on one level, like anybody who's spent time on the reservation and is related to folks here, knows somebody who has died of some weird cancer. So I think everybody's impacted pretty immediately. And then, when I was a kid, I went to boarding school, residential school, I guess, for Pat up there. And Shelley, sorry. Just outside of Tuba City, there's something that's now a Superfund site. It's called euphemistically called Rare Metals. It was a uranium processing mill. And when I was a adolescent, we used to go out there and spray paint and smoke cigarettes. It was like the one cool post-industrial kind of site in the area. But now it's a Superfund site. It's it's been remediated. It's one of these kind of sites where they focused on it. but you know, it's really arid out here, and they're worried that the waste will leach into the groundwater, which, you know, is incredibly dangerous for folks out this way. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think a lot of people know about the history of like Navajo code talkers and how language was utilized to create this unbreakable code, and it helped win the war.
Mhm.
But I don't think that like afterwards, you know, a lot of the fissile material during the research of the creation of the first nuclear weapon, and then later on during the Cold War and the kind of buildup around the arms race and the development of the nuclear arsenal, you know, a lot of that work was done by Native folks in the Four Corners region. And often they were not warned or given, you know, of the dangers or given like the necessary protective equipment. So, you know, there's this legacy, you know, that's going to be felt for, you know, generations to come. And the map that I ran across has 521 of these sites. Some of them are just very small claims, you know, that are just kind of depressions in the landscape now. And some of them are much larger. They're big operations, like the rare metals outside of Tuba City, Arizona, or this site that I'm going to today. It's called Mexican Hat Disposal Cell. There's a section on my website called Connecting the Dots.
Oh, that would kind of show us like the daily sort of experience?
Not the daily experience. It's just the beginning of the survey, I guess.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just mention, I'm just throwing this out there, new technologies, photographer. The drone like has enabled a pretty amazing, it's an amazing tool, I think, for imaging environmental injustice.
Absolutely.
And
from what I understand, also maintaining it, you know, like learning about like, you know, what the status of different areas is and what changes there have been. Like it's particularly efficient for that. Donna, this kind of connects to a piece you were mentioning to me about eugenics as well, like and that being a lost history. Maybe you could talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, so my next project is about reproductive violence against women. And David, you and I have kind of talked about this before, but, and Shelley kind of talks about this regarding, you know, violence against women and a history of that. I mean, over the course of history and over the course since, well, since the 1800s at least, when Indigenous women were put onto reservations, the Indian Health Act actually forcibly sterilized somewhere between 7,000 and 40,000 Indigenous women, as young as 11 years old in some cases, where they would go in for health treatment and, you know, for something like appendix, and come out with, you know, basically a hysterectomy. But this is common, right, among minority people in our history.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly in the Black community and other minorities as well. So can you give us a little peek as to like sort of where you're going visually with that?
So at the moment, I mean, I'm still working through a lot, but I've decided to use color for the first time, which is really rare for me. I'm a black and white artist, but I'm also trying to sort of tell it as almost like a fable, which will be kind of interesting visually.
Got it.
But you know, it's just another issue that kind of has been swept under the rug for a really long time.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a bunch of really wonderful comments in the chat section. If anyone intended what they've said as a question, or they would like to ask a question, you're more than welcome to. Obviously, chat can also just be statements, but if anybody has any questions, we're open to those as well. I know there was one other thing. Oh yeah, Will actually got into that idea about can't breathe and intersectionality around that. Well, Donna, did you have any final thoughts about just the exhibit as a whole that we could throw out there? Or?
Well, I would certainly encourage people to view the entire exhibit that's being hosted on your site.
Yeah.
As part of the Equal Dignity campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It's also in conjunction with Atlanta Celebrates Photography. So the URLs are also on acpinfo.org. And Aline is featuring each one of these artists on Lenscratch this week. And we've technically opened with Will today in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day. And each one of the artists will be featured through Sunday. And I just really can't thank them enough for their amazing work. And for them, when I sent out an email to them, and many of them whom I did not know, they were just so kind and easy to work with as far as getting me work and sharing what they know, particularly people like Shelley and Will.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage you also to go to their websites, which are also listed.
I would as well, yeah.
Yeah, because certainly the breadth of their work is far more than what we can talk about here today.
Absolutely.
But it's really, really important. And one other thing that I did want to say is that in choosing the artists, because there were many to choose from, this group, I feel like, is very, not only do they have different visual aesthetics and perspectives, given the time of their career, their geographic location, etc., but the work, the quality of the work is absolutely stellar. So definitely check out the exhibition and check out Lenscratch this week.
Absolutely, yeah, and keep up with Lenscratch. She does a lot of really interesting features and puts a light on a lot of new, really interesting artists. I see that actually Shelley and Pat are still with us. Did either one of you have anything else that you wanted to say? I'll take a head nod or no, and then I'll wrap up.
I just wanted to again say thank you to everyone. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to staying in touch with everyone as we move forward here.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. Watch out for those rabbits.
I'm gonna send Pat like a chain of bunny emoticon.
we'll wait till
Sure.
Yeah.
Ellie, did you want to say something?
Aline? Aline?
Ah, yes, Ellie, I didn't know you were still on. Yes, absolutely. If there's anything else you want to say, please do.
I just can't, every day is like a Christmas present. I get to really delve into a different artist. And for me, I've been producing Lenscratch for 13 years, totally unpaid. No one gets paid. It's a so you are all a gift to us this week.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to end. Well, please go to equaldignity.org and sign up for our campaign to follow future programs. As I said earlier, remember to vote. Early voting is open in Georgia. I'd like to also say thank you again to Aline and Lenscratch, as well as Bex and Atlanta Celebrates Photography for their help getting the word out about this program. Also, make sure you check out Atlanta Celebrates Photography for all their future events. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.